Good day. We are back at the Speakers Bureau, St. Lucie County Public Schools Speakers Bureau. And we, as usual, bring different guests throughout this community that come to encourage and inspire and motivate us through their life story. And so we have a very special guest. Many of you do know him. He's been around for a long time here in St. Lucie County Public Schools. It is Mr. Earl Little, and he was a teacher. He's a retired educator here in St. Lucie County Schools. For 40 years, yes. He has been a music teacher with us. And so, Mr. Little, we are so excited to have you and very humble to be able to have you as a guest speaker.
It's my pleasure.
Well, great. Now, I have some questions for you. I'm going to ask you to just basically give us your life story. I mean, you have been a teacher here in St. Lucie County Public Schools for over 40 years. So we know that you have a lot of history for us today.
I just try to remember it all.
Okay. Well, and, you know, we all wish that we come to your age because you've already shared with me how old you are. Would you tell the audience?
Right now, I'm 92.
So, of course, we all want to live to be over 90 and have your type of health and well-being at your age. I hear you just came back from a trip, and you drove the whole way back and forth. Can you tell us where you just came from?
I have a daughter who lives in Dothan, Alabama, and I went to spend Thanksgiving holidays with her. It's about 500 miles, but we drive because flying is not exactly what it used to be, and I just enjoy driving. It's very relaxing.
Okay, so when you say we drive, someone travels with you?
No, I'm alone now. I was widowed twice, so I'm by myself, and so I just have to go.
Well, Mr. Little, share with us your profession, what you actually did when you were here with us in the public school system.
I started as a music teacher. When I was in school here, music and chorus were extracurricular activities. As time progressed, the State Department gave a position to music teachers. I had to wait 4 years before I could get in the position. And from that time, I stayed there until I retired. I was at Lincoln Park Academy as choir director, at Fort Pierce Central, and I ended up at Port St. Lucie High. I enjoyed what I did, and apparently the students did too, because they had to volunteer to be in my program. And I had to make it worthwhile so they'd want to. And then I was just afraid to retire because I thought I would be bored. But I continued, and everything worked out well.
So you mentioned that you started out at Lincoln Park Academy. Was Lincoln Park Academy what it is today, or was it totally different back then? Share with us a little bit.
It was totally different. In those days, it had moved from the Means Court site to the 17th Street site. And that's where most of my work was done. At that time, it was very interesting. We didn't have a music room. So we taught chorus in the cafeteria, on the gym stage, and the D wing and the C wing. And eventually they built a music suite, which was air conditioning, and that was a real bonus.
And back then, was it segregation, or was the children together?
We were segregated until the late 60s. And at that time, I moved to Dan McCarty, and all of my groups from that time on were integrated. And we still, some of the best work we did was after integration. And I mention this because it may be some of my own doing, but because of what the students did, I received quite a few honors for their performances. And one of those honors was to become president of the Florida Vocal Association, which included all of the schools in the state.
Okay.
And of course, because of what they did, I received the nomination for and the award of the Teacher of the Year for that work. And continuing at Fort Pierce Central, I also received on behalf of what the students did, the Associate Master Teacher Award from the State Department of Education. And all of that was because of what I was able to do with the students.
Wow, so we have a lot of students out there that are now, they're adults and they're in their 50s, probably 60s, and I
Yes.
don't know.
Yeah, the choral teacher at Lincoln Park Academy today and at Westwood today were former students of mine. And I must say that
And who are they?
George Ramming
Okay.
and Donald Mealy. And they continue to receive awards
Oh, yes, they
for
do.
their work.
They are incredible, and it
they
comes
give
from
me
you.
credit for it, but
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, yeah, of course they have to give you credit for it. So you mentioned back in those days when you basically started your career that it was segregated. Tell us a little bit more about your childhood and what was the environment at that time, and how did you grow up? What was your situation and any challenges that you might have had?
Well, that's a long, that's quite a statement. But anyway, all of my formal education, my high school education, was received at Lincoln Park Academy. It was grades 1 through 12 at that time in Means Court before the second Lincoln Park Academy was built. We had very excellent teachers, and I always felt that we had teachers who were very qualified, but we also had them for year after year. So there was a continuity between what we did in 7th grade to what we did in 8th grade and 9th, because it was the same teacher, and that teacher made sure we continued what we did. And when we finished high school, even though we came from a little place called Fort Pierce.
So you were born and raised here in
I
Fort
was
Pierce?
born and raised in Fort Pierce.
Wow, okay.
But when we finished the Lincoln Park Academy and went to whatever college we chose, we found out that we were well qualified and we had nothing to be ashamed of, and we were successful as we continued our education.
What college did you go to?
I started at Hampton Institute in Virginia. Well, that was interrupted because it was during the Second World War, and I was drafted into the service. Well, that worked out fine, but I found out that at that time there was such a thing as the, what do you call it, GI Bill of Rights. And the GI Bill of Rights would take care of the cost of your education. So I was able to not only go to Hampton, but I went to Conservatory of Music in Ohio, and the government paid for all of it. So the stint in the Army was a blessing.
Now, as a child, you were born here in Fort Pierce.
I
So
was
how
born
were
for-
you born? Did you go to hospital, or back in them days? How was that?
No, we had midwives in those days.
Well, a lot of our students and community and young people, they don't realize that. All they know is that we have hospitals today.
Yeah.
So give us your story.
Well, I don't know who the midwife was, but anyway, that was the one who helped my mother in the delivery. The hospital on 7th Street wasn't there at that time. Right now, I think that's a senior citizen facility.
Yes.
But then the Lawnwood, of course, naturally followed that one. But we had no hospitals. We had doctors who made visits, home visits, and midwives and nurses and things like that. And we were always grateful for Dr. Benton, who was our
Yes.
black physician, and he made house calls and he took care of us.
And I've heard about Dr. Benton, and I'm not from here originally, but my husband is.
Yes.
And my husband was lucky enough to be born on 7th Street.
Well, I was
by
born
that
on
time.
Dundas Court.
Dundas Court. So how was it? What was it like back in those days growing up, your community? And
Well, it was the era of segregation, but for some reason, we knew what we could do, and we did it well, and we were happy with what we did. So it didn't bother us for quite a while. It was after the, I guess the 60s, when all the sit-ins and things like that started. But before that, we had everything that we needed, all of our own.
so you lived a simple life, and
And
you
lived
were
a simple
very.
life, and we enjoyed it, and we progressed.
Sounds like you had love there
Oh yes,
and support from the community at large.
and that was the big thing. We had the support of the community all of the time. And I mentioned Lincoln Park Academy because that was the hub of activities. Almost everything in our community centered around Lincoln Park Academy. And I also mentioned that Lincoln Park Academy at that time was the only high school for black people in the four-county area. If you lived in Okeechobee, in Martin County, in Indian River County, you went to high school in Lincoln Park Academy. You were bused in. And that continued until about 1943 or 4, something like that, when high schools were open in those counties.
So way back then, it was almost, I think, unheard of for a lot of African American people to get a higher education outside of their graduating from high school. What influenced you to move forward in life and to continue on after high school?
Well, I finished high school just as World War II was beginning. As you know, before that time, we went through a period called the Depression. Money was very tight, and most of us didn't see any way that we could go any further. In fact, a lot of us dropped out of school to just support ourselves because we didn't have these resources. But there were jobs available. Now, there were no Burger Kings and McDonald's and things like that. It was difficult work. There were farming areas west of town, and we would hit the trucks and go out and do the vegetable farming, you know, the tomatoes, the string beans, and all of that. And those were the extra jobs that we could do. And I think at that time I decided there must be a better way of doing this, and it must be education.
Yeah.
So I said, I'll do this to get what I want.
Yeah, that grove work was real
Oh
hard. I
yeah,
heard.
don't mention the groves. You would get at the ladders and pick the oranges, and sometimes you'd fall out the ladders.
Okay. So it was doing that. That was kind of a wake-up call.
Yes, I said there must be a better thing. But we did what we had to do in order to progress.
So, is there someone that you especially look up to that helped to motivate you in life?
It was all of the teachers that we had at Lincoln Park Academy. The teachers were very dedicated, and they were interested in the students, and we looked up to them. In fact, that was the next best thing we could do to prepare ourselves for a very good living. There was, we have to mention Ms. Pierce, Ms. Stubbs, Ms. Warwick, Ms. Rhodes, all of we have to, and they knew us, and they encouraged us. As a matter of fact, I was in college, and my money ran out, and I used one of my teachers as a reference. So they wrote and asked the teacher, is this somebody that you would trust with money? And she didn't say yes. She wrote him a letter, and she said, if this person came to me for money and I didn't have it, I would go out and borrow it and give it to him. So naturally, I got the loan.
Okay, tell us a little bit about your parents, and do you have siblings? And
No,
know.
I was the only child,
Oh.
and I miss the brothers and sisters that I never had to this day.
Wow,
But
okay.
I didn't have anything to do with that.
Okay.
But my parents did common labor work, and my mother was a domestic, and my father worked in the fields and the groves and so forth. And that's the way we progressed.
And you were an only child.
And I was an only child. But they were insistent that I go to school. And now I realize why.
So they were your motivators too, and people you looked up to.
All right.
Give us your recipe for success.
That's a difficult question. Hard work, learning as much about it as you possibly can, and decide which way you want to go. I ended up in music, and that was because of a need we had. In the church that I grew up, we did not have a pianist or a music person, and one person would serve 2 or 3 churches. But sometimes when our services ran over, the pianist would get a little bit annoyed because she'd be late for the next church. So I decided, well, maybe I could learn how to do this, and I could do this at my own church. And I think that was my starting point.
Oh, that's why you chose to go into the music field.
Yes.
Okay. Last but not least, and I say that before I even get to that, was there any time in life that you had a challenge that maybe you thought, how am I going to be able to, get through this? Something that you can encourage our audience and our young people, our students. And this program goes into the homes of St. Lucie County. So we have parents out there and others that, we all face challenges, and some of us think that we can't get through those or we can't move forward in life. Or can you give us some of your wisdom on how you got through? Because of course you had 2 wives that 2 marriages at one time. I don't know what actually happened with those marriages, but just tell us some challenging things and how to get through them based on your story.
Well, you have to be dedicated, and you have to try to find out what's required of you and see if you can do it. The choice of music was not altogether my first choice. Somehow or the other, I got the idea that I wanted to be a dentist. And the local dentist, Dr. Rhodes, encouraged me, and he got me a job in the dental laboratory. Well, at that time, I was also taking piano lessons, and I had to make a decision on which one. Well, when I finally found out that being a dentist required 8 years and getting a degree in music was 4 years, it was a foregone conclusion. But you try to learn as much as you can about them and what's required, and prepare yourself and work on it. And of course,
Did you ever get any bumps in the road?
Well, all of the time. Money was one of the bumps. And I mentioned the fact that being in the service and being eligible for the GI Bill of Rights solved most of that problem. But I need to mention, too, that I didn't have the background for this that some students had. I had heard of the Oberlin Conservatory of Music, and that it was a little bit liberal toward all races. So I got the idea that I wanted to go there. And I applied, and they said that if you came and you took the audition, they would make a way for you. So I prepared, and I thought I was prepared. So I went and I took the audition. And at the end of the audition, the head of the conservatory gave us all a conversation, and he asked me, when are you going back home? We can let you know whether or not you're accepted. I said, well, I didn't plan to go back home. I brought all of my things with me.
Yeah.
And he saw my determination. And so that was the way in which I got in. It wasn't, I was competing with students who were far more prepared than I was. But I knew that if I worked, and I could make it.
You were just that determined. So.
Yes. And then when he saw my determination, he said, okay, we'll try to make a place for you. Otherwise, he said, go home and we'll let you know. But I didn't plan to
I think
leave.
that is such an important part of being successful in life, whatever whatever success means, accomplishment, whether it be family, you know, and being a good parent, or going and getting further in your education, or for our children now, doing well in school. And I have story after story of young people who, because they were determined, it's not
Yes.
that they were top of the class, or if grades came easy to them, even to the point of young people who could not read well, but they were so determined, they ended up getting their degree, their college degree, because they made up their mind that they were just going to do this no matter what it took. In your story, talking about going and taking all your belongings and saying to the guy, you know,
I'm here.
I'm
and
here.
I'm not going back.
So do you have anything else you want to share with us before closing? We have a good amount of time. And if there's any words of wisdom, Mr. Little, you're 92 years old. I know that you have such, first of all, before you even do that, how did you make it to 92 and be as healthy looking and be so you know, you haven't lost your thinking ability and things that others have. What is your success for that?
It's all by the grace of God.
Okay.
I wake up every morning and I do what I think I'm supposed to do and follow the leaders,
Okay.
do my daily devotions and get my instructions for the day, what things profitable and what things you should leave alone. And if anything is not profitable to you, don't bother with it. Be careful what you eat, how much you eat, and the types of things you eat.
Oh boy.
And if things
That's a
don't
big
agree
one.
with you, if things don't agree with you, leave them alone.
And your body will let you know if it doesn't
Your body
agree with
will
you.
give you a signal.
Especially as you get older. When we're young, it looks like we could just be a dumpster
Yeah.
with the things that we put on our body, and we don't. For many of our young people, we don't feel any different. But as you get older, your body begins to let you know what it will take in and what it does not want.
And the first signal you get, go to the doctor.
Yes.
I'm not afraid of doctors. I'm not afraid of medication.
Okay.
And I try to find the solution to some of the things that, you know, don't work as well as they used to. But thank God that they're still working.
Yes. And you were married twice. For how long each marriage? And if you don't mind, tell us what happened.
Well, both of my wives were musicians. Naturally, that brought us together. My first wife, well, it happens I met my second wife before the first wife. But when we finished all of the schools in the South, there was a rule, a national rule, that in the South, the schools should be separate but equal. So if you had finished your bachelor's degree and you wanted to get a master's, you could not go to a state school in the South. So all the southern states would pay those teachers who wanted to get a master's degree to go to a northern university. So I took advantage of it. I had two teachers as bachelor's degree who referred me to University of Michigan. And that's where I met my first wife.
And how long were you married?
We were married for 47 years before she passed. But she was from Alabama, and she was one of those Southerners who were at the University of Michigan who were paid to go someplace else. And that's how I met her.
Okay.
She was a pianist, and she was my accompanist for my choir, built-in chaperone, and just an extra helper all the way around. It was a very wonderful marriage, and I was very fortunate to do that, and I still appreciate it. I met my second wife when we were freshmen at Hampton. She was a violinist, and I was a pianist, so they assigned me to accompany her. And we became friends, and knew her family, and they invited me to their house to see her. So anyway, it just so happened that I was drafted and didn't go back to Hampton, and she went someplace else. And we lost contact for 57 years. For some reason, and we always say this was an act of God, about 6 months after my first wife passed, I was home alone eating, and the phone rang. And she said, "This is Alice Bright." And I almost dropped my false teeth. So we continued to bring each other up on all the things that had happened in our career for the last 57 years.
Okay.
And we found out we had a lot in common. And we were in conversation day after day on the phone. And then, of course, that prompted a visit. And we kept visiting back and forth. And we said, now, wait a minute. We might be a certain age, but we should get married.
Okay.
And we lived together. And that was another 10 years.
Okay.
And a very good marriage also.
Okay.
And although I lost both of them, I'm always thankful
So
for
both of them passed.
Yes.
Yeah. We are about out of time. And so we didn't get that one nugget that I wanted you to answer. Maybe you can answer it real short, real
I'll try.
quick answer. Last but not least, what does it mean to you to be great?
Well, can't consider myself as great.
Well, yeah, but you have done some great things in this community.
Well, ideas come to you, and you think you can do them, and you think they're worthwhile, and you try. For some reason, sometimes you succeed. Not all the time, but sometimes you do succeed. And that's what you are working for.
Mr. Little, thank you so much for coming on the program, and hopefully this wasn't too much of a drill.
Well, it's nice to remember some of these things.
I had our deputy superintendent come on, and he said he wanted to put me in the hot seat one day. But we thank you so much for coming to the Speakers Bureau here and sharing your life story with us. Incredible life, and we appreciate you as a community. You are an icon in this community.
Well,
you
I've been
are
blessed,
a pillar
and I
in
appreciate
this
it.
community.
And
thank you.
speaking of age, I have something that I think about all the time. I said, Lord, you've given me days of life. Now help me to add life to those days.
Yes.
And that's what I still try to do.
Thank
And by the
you.
way, I'm still working.
Wonderful. Thank you for our audience today for coming and tuning in to the Speakers Bureau. We appreciate you as a community, young people. We want you to continue to make a difference. We need you to come back home and do some things in your community that will make change, as Mr. Little has done. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.